on. I'm going to finish this one, and we'll see if we're actually streaming over on the other one. So everybody, try to restart. Looks like it's happening now. We're actually moving. I'm going to hang this one up right now. Alright, now where's that fucking Benny Goodman shit? Let's put that on here. Game of Caravan. Okay. Come on, Benny. Hey, Octavio. Hey, everybody. Now we're moving. Sorry for the delay. Oh my god, is my face red? Alright, everybody. Hey, sorry for the delay there. I am just gonna finish this bourbon, which I already dropped an earbud into. I hope my new iPod phones are okay. Or AirPods. Welcome the fuck along, everybody. Hope there might be some new people out there who aren't familiar with my shit. Just got off of the phone with John Rickards Landiker on WGN. He actually played one of my old songs. I thought she was a goth, but it turned out she was dead. Lucky for him, it wasn't swearing. Hey everybody, welcome along. Hey Yvette. Hey Kathy and Teresa. Here we are finally. Sorry for the delay there. We had, I don't know what the hell was going on wrong with Restream. That is a fraught 15 minutes when I'm trying to connect and can't. Let me get dressed properly anyway. Here making his contractual appearance is Mr. Miles. We'll give it a second for everybody to get logged on. Sorry for all of the effing people who might have been coming up to look. Something was going wrong with the server. The software couldn't connect to it. They were aware of the issue. Kathy, I don't have a link to it yet. But I think the show is still going on. But I'm sure tomorrow it'll be posted someplace. Alright. We can definitely still blame Pullman. Pullman owed H.H. Holmes money. Not much. It was like $6. I don't know why they didn't just give it to him. But the Pullman Company owed one of his companies roughly $6. Welcome along, everybody. We're going to go to a second for everybody to get logged on before I get going here properly. Sorry for the delay getting started. Believe me, that was not my fucking intention tonight. But welcome along, everybody. Sorry for the delay. We'll give Benny just one tune here, and then we'll get started properly because we're so late. Now, I'm not worried about the Mysterians. I know you guys are gonna be. I know you guys will bear with me. I'm a little worried about everybody else. Anybody new here? I do this over on Effing the Night to try to attract a couple of new people. Effing's got a whole distinct audience now, because Mandy's been doing such a great job with it. So today I got about 800 pictures in the microfilm room, about half of which are about Johann Hawk. And the other half are about other shit. Some stuff about Wilbur F's story and the exact articles that led Wilbur F's story to be horsewhipped in the street. But could have been done just on general principles, of course. And strangely, I haven't gotten too many messages about it. Hey, Carrie. Yeah, I did Haunted History. It wasn't called Haunted History when we filmed it. It was going to be like a murder show in general. They didn't change it around to a ghost show till well after we filmed. Hey, Sherlock. Good to meet you the other night. Hey, Rose. Well, alright, we're off to a great fucking start here, which is perfect for Effing Chicago tours, where we are allowed to swear freely. Alright, I think we can go ahead and get started. In fact, it's been enough time. I'm going to tell Benny to knock it off over here. Alright, Benny, knock it off. Alright, welcome along, everybody. Welcome to Mysterious Chicago, Effing Chicago Tours tonight. I'm Adam Seltzer. I run Mysterious Chicago Tours. I do the Haunted History Tours over the Lincoln Park Zoo. I'll be at cemeteries all weekend long, but tonight we're on Effing Chicago. Those of you who do not know Effing Chicago, Effing is a collective of tour guides behaving badly. Most of us are professional tour guides. Well, all of us are professional tour guides. Most of us have corporate gigs where we're required to wear polo shirts. We're supposed to be respectful when we go by the big silver building with that one asshole's name in 2-story letters. I never exactly followed these laws anyway, but here on Effing Chicago, we're allowed to do whatever the fuck we want. We can swear all we want. We can wear hoodies if we feel like it, and we advertise it that way so you can't complain. So welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer. Today we are going to be talking about H.H. Holmes, which is my real area of expertise. I wrote this book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, which came out a few years ago. I just found out they are carrying it, possibly for the first time, over at the Chicago History Museum. I was so excited. After I got done in their microfilm room today, I went down to the cafe, but the cafe was already closed. I'd been in there for so long, but stopped over in the bookstore. They had H.H. Holmes. They had the Graceland Cemetery book. Put that up here too. And they had the Mysterious Chicago book. They even had Just Kill Me, my young adult novel about a Chicago ghost tour guide who makes places more haunted by killing people at them. But welcome along, everybody. Glad to have everybody along, especially glad for anybody new today. Normally on Thursday nights, I am over at Mysterious Chicago giving these talks, Mysterious Chicago tours. That's who I mostly run through. But tonight I thought I'd do this one through Effing Chicago. I know some people have been asking about H.H. Holmes on Mandy's Talk, so I thought I'd just ride right in on those coattails here. So I did this through this whole book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil. I spent years and years going through this guy's paperwork and trying to piece together what actually happened, which is really quite distinct from the way it is often told in books. So we're going to move right on to a basic H.H. Holmes recap. March 31st, 1893, the Chicago Tribune published this article, Hid in Secret Rooms. Apparently, this guy H.H. Holmes had been going around to furniture dealers and suppliers and mattress dealers and flooring companies and hardware dealers and anybody else who would be relevant to this venture and saying, hey, I'm starting a hotel for the upcoming World's Fair. Why don't you give me all your stuff on credit, and then I will go and make sure you get paid later on. Nobody should have believed this, but this made the news when they finally found out where all of their stuff was being hidden. He had like false doors in his place, stuff was hidden inside of the walls. So this was the building that he was operating in. He had added a third floor that he said was going to be for the upcoming World's Fair space. The rest was about 5 years old by then. This is actually a temporary roof on top of it, because after he added that third floor, he also took out several fire insurance policies on it. And strangely enough, it caught fire. They'd put on this unsightly temporary roof by the time anybody took a photograph of it. Now, about a year or so later, he was arrested in Philadelphia. He was arrested for a crime in Philadelphia where they thought he had faked his best friend's death for the insurance money. Really, he had just killed his best friend. But as stories about how a couple of these kids who should have been in Holmes' custody were no longer there, a few of his girlfriends who'd been seen around that building in Chicago had disappeared, people remembered, hey, didn't this guy have a building back in Chicago that was supposed to be full of hidden rooms and secret passages? And then they all decided, yeah, let's just forget about it. They decided not to investigate at the time. But then the next summer, they found Benjamin Peitzel's children, two of his daughters, buried in a shallow grave in Toronto in a house that Holmes had been renting. And from there on, they decided to investigate. And then they spent a couple of weeks with the police making absolute fools of themselves, saying things like, we found a rope. This could have been for hanging people. Or we found a blunt object. He could have bludgeoned people with this. Now, there were things you could use to kill people in that building, but there's also stuff you could use to kill people in your house. It's kind of a sobering thing to think of now and then. You can build a murder castle from the things you find at home. The investigation had just about wound down in Chicago. People had just kind of decided, you know what, this is just getting out of hand. When the New York World published their own version of an article about it, which was a mixture of stuff they'd read in Chicago papers and some pure fiction, but including this diagram with things like the black closet, the maze, the room of the three corpses, the hanging secret chamber, which everybody thinks means that they say there was a room for hanging people. It meant it was hanging between the first and second floors. This whole article sort of solidified the myth of H.H. Holmes as the hotel keeper who was preying on World's Fair victims, which was just something they were speculating he might have done. The building had never actually been a hotel. I tend to absolutely devastate people by saying that. I swear I'm not just trying to spoil anybody's fun. The guy did kill 9 or 10 people. But it wasn't World's Fair patrons, and it wasn't in a hotel. He had claimed that he was opening a hotel, but the whole thing was really just a swindling operation. And it took me a while to figure that out. It is just so ingrained at the time. But this was a lot of years of digging through like the microfilm records, looking for stories about this guy, making sure that I had everything. Like here's the Chicago Daily News with laughing at the police. Plenty of talk, but no legal evidence in the Holmes case. This is about when it started winding down. There's also, I especially love the legal archives, where they have all the lawsuits of all the times people got sued. From what I was able to find, Holmes was sued about 60 times while he was in Chicago under different names. Usually he could have somebody else's name on top of the paperwork. But what you do is you fill out these forms. You find these in the microfilm reels of the legal archives. You fill out the numbers. A few weeks later, you come back and they bring you the paperwork, which might just be an envelope with a summons in it. Or it might be a whole box of crumbling Victorian paperwork. You know I love this shit. I spent all day, 3.5 hours today. I took about 800 pictures in the microfilm room over at the History Museum. It was so cool. So you end up with these piles of crumbling Victorian paperwork. These are ones with a whole bunch of H.H. Holmes cases. Mr. Wakesell, the Van Schack brothers. Now, sometimes when you open these up, you find nothing but basically illegible paperwork, but other times there are things like the architect's original diagram of the first floor front of the building that we now call the Murder Castle at 63rd and Wallace, which isn't all that impressive a drawing, but it did help me determine once and for all exactly what the dimensions of the thing were, because a lot of newspapers describe the dimensions, but they didn't necessarily all say the same thing. Now, if you really research Holmes, you get all the primary stuff and all the stuff that was written about him over the years, both in his own time and later on. You find that it's pretty easy to trace how the legend grew. Now, primarily, one of the important things here is for a very long time, if you wanted to find out anything about H.H. Holmes, you were probably going to have to go to the one source that was in print, which was The Gangs of Chicago, originally published under the name Gem of the Prairie by Herbert Asbury. Asbury's take on Holmes, which is a chapter in this book, The Monster of 63rd Street, is a mixture of fact, misconceptions, things that were debunked at the time that he forgot were debunked at the time, and stuff that he just outright made up. But we'll go back to the beginning here. This is Holmes's own house. Most of what we know of his boyhood comes from interviews with his neighbors and his own autobiography, though the biography itself is basically useless. He was born in 1861 under the name Herman Mudgett in Gilmanton, New Hampshire. I would have changed my name too if my name was Herman Mudgett. When he was 17, he married Clara Lovering, and she and their newborn baby Robert followed him out to Ann Arbor, where he studied medicine. He'd already studied some in New Hampshire under a doctor named Nahum White, who was noted for his collection of morbid anatomical specimens. This was a man who had a dissecting room before that was actually legal. It's probably a safe bet that Holmes helped him with some grave robbing back in those days. By the time he got to Ann Arbor, that era was kind of over, but even then there were rumors that he and Professor Herdman, the anatomy professor, were occasionally going out on eerie midnight errands. But neighbors said that they would see Clara walking around the boarding house with black eyes. And eventually she took Robert, went back to New Hampshire, only saw him a couple more times after that. Holmes graduated by the skin of his teeth. By no accounts was this guy a good doctor or a popular person. His nickname among his other students was Smegma. I'll let you make of that what you will. So eventually he married a woman named Myrta Zutique Belknap, who he apparently met in Minneapolis, and tried to get a divorce from Clara by publishing some bullshit about her and swearing out a warrant and swearing out a lawsuit for divorce with Wharton Plummer, a lawyer who worked with him for years. It was just about as crooked as he was. He's kind of the Saul Goodman of this case. Didn't actually divorce Clara, but married Myrta anyway, probably not in any legal sense of the word, and they had a daughter, the two of them, by the name of Lucy. So with Lucy, he moved to Chicago, where he first started using the name H.H. Holmes. Earliest time we have of him using that is the summer of 1886 when he went to pharmacy school, because he had decided to work in the pharmacy of Dr. Holton at 63rd and Wallace. Now, the way they always tell this in Holmes retellings, starting with Herbert Asbury, is old Mrs. Dr. Holton was trying to operate the pharmacy herself, but her husband, the doctor, was dying of cancer upstairs, so she was only too happy to hire this energetic young go-getter Holmes. And then both Dr. and Mrs. Holton disappeared. Holmes told everybody they'd moved to California and sold him the business. It wasn't quite like that. It took me a while to figure this out, but it turns out Dr. Holton was a young woman, not an old man. The doctor was a woman. What? The doctor was Elizabeth Sarah Holton. Her husband had some kind of job on the railway. Once Holmes started working there, though, he managed to manipulate it, stole a lot of items, got rid of a lot of stock to lower the value of it so he could get a better price. It was the kind of thing that he would do. He was able to lower the value of things when he needed a good price or a tax assessment, and then he would raise the value up on something when he was trying to sell it, all through all kinds of illegal means. Sound like anything that's been in the news lately? Anyway, Dr. and Mrs. Holton were both fine. They both lived well into the 20th century. Here's me at a selfie with their graves. It's at Oakwood Cemetery, right by where we do the cleanup of the Jewish section. But it was while he was operating Dr. Holton's pharmacy that I believe Holmes discovered his one true love. Buying shit on credit and then not paying for it. This is all a lawsuit from, he had bought a bunch of barbershop equipment that the guy tried to repossess by himself, which you cannot actually do. So Holmes actually won this one. But shortly thereafter, in January of 1887, his name and his mother-in-law's name start appearing on paperwork to buy the land across the street, where that summer Holmes would start construction on the building we now call the castle. And what you always hear is that Holmes built it all by himself. Nobody else got paid. Well, here's the receipt from people getting paid for it. Trouble is, the workers got paid. It was their bosses who didn't. He stiffed an awful lot of companies. Also, sound like anything that's been in the news lately? So this is the building that he ended up with, or as it appeared in 1895. Initially, it was a two-story building. It was retail spaces on the first floor, apartments on the second. People lived there long-term, including Holmes himself for a while. Now, people often ask, we're up to about 1887 in the timeline here. A lot of people ask me about whether Holmes could have been Jack the Ripper. So let's move quickly into 1888 here. The Jack the Ripper murders took place in summer and fall of 1888 in the Whitechapel district of London. Here's Holmes on the voter rolls from October of 1888 in Chicago. Here's an answer that he filed to some statements of the architect who tried to sue him eventually. Filed October 12th of 1888. It would have been written down a few years before that. It's also noted one of his father said that he came to visit in November of 1888. He apparently registered to vote but missed the election. In fact, he's not listed as a voter at all. So evidence is pretty solid that he was not in London. Having him in New Hampshire in November gets him closer to London, but not close enough to stab anybody. Be a really big fucking knife to handle that. So, 1889, a guy moved into the castle building by the name of Ned Connor, who arrived with his wife Julia and their 4-year-old daughter Pearl. Now, Ned knew right away that Julia was having an affair with H.H. Holmes. At one point, Holmes talked to him and said something that he wouldn't have known unless he had been sleeping with Julia. We can only use our imaginations about what that might have been. But Ned and Julia decided to split up. Julia stayed around the castle building and carried on a 2-year affair with Holmes until 1891, Christmas of 1891, Julia and Pearl, who was now 6, were supposed to show up to Julia's sister's wedding in Davenport. But they never showed up. These were probably Holmes' first victims. Julia, he was fairly consistent later on saying that Julia died during an abortion. He never said what happened to Pearl, but most likely she would have been killed with cyanide. Her place in the building was taken by Emmeline Segrand. There's no photograph of Emmeline, though there is this one that was found among some stuff that's related to Holmes. Looks kind of like her, is in a building that I can trace her to. It's kind of close. It would be a lot better if I had a name written on the back or something, though. But Holmes was employing her around the castle building, but also just carrying on an affair with her. And she seems like she knew Holmes was married already, but my impression is she thought that his wife was about to die. And she figured, in a year I'll be married to him and we'll live in a big house on Honore Street. She was a dreamer. She was the kind of person who wrote entire poems below her signature. Back when you couldn't just copy and paste, you actually have to write out, lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and in passing leave behind us footprints in the sands of time. That was her signature. Those of you coming in late, that's just fine. I got started late today too. There was some kind of problem with the motherfucking server. Still making me mad. But it was while Emmeline was in the building in 1892 that Holmes decided he was going to add a third floor that would be a hotel space for the upcoming World's Fair. Now, whether he ever intended to have this hotel be open for business, I'm not really sure. I think he had figured out beforehand that you could make more money pretending to operate a hotel than you could actually operating one. In any case, it was never actually completed or anything. But he did add a third floor that was slightly better than a papier-mâché facade, and printed up all of these letters like this one to Bliss Bullard and Gormley saying, "Please deliver to H.H. Holmes stuff for this building on which I will guarantee payment. Yours truly, H.S. Campbell." Now, Bliss Bullard and Gormley, the hardware people, were so eager to get rich off of the fair like everybody else that they weren't checking credit very well, or even whether H.S. Campbell was a real person. Down below it says in Holmes' handwriting, bill should be addressed to H.H. Holmes, 701 63rd Street. I've been through enough of his stuff that I know his handwriting pretty well when I see it. But so this unsightly third floor was added onto here. It wasn't ever furnished or exactly habitable. Really, the whole thing had just been a plan to make money. He'd also borrowed like $3,000 as an investment from a doctor who lived on the second floor. He had the guy who ran the cigar shop downstairs mixed up with the whole thing. Really, the third floor was just so he could tell investors and suppliers and insurers, yes, I really am adding on this third floor. But Emmeline disappeared at the end of 1892. Holmes, again, was fairly consistent later on in saying that she had died during an abortion. And her place was taken by a woman named Minnie Williams, who had been an aspiring actress till she ran out of money and decided it was time to get a real job, and ended up working for H.H. Holmes. Of all the people in this saga, Minnie is perhaps the weirdest. It's much harder with her than anybody else to get a straight story about what she was like. The impression that I get is that nobody could really stand her except for Holmes himself, and even he seemed like he was kind of afraid of her. She definitely knew more about what was going on than other people as far as the swindling was concerned. The impression I get is that she posed as his wife but didn't really like him much. She just thought that she was going to use his money to relaunch her acting career. But they ended up renting an apartment on Wrightwood together along with Minnie's long-lost sister, Nanny. They'd been raised separately until they met as teenagers again. By some accounts, Minnie didn't even remember that she'd ever had a baby sister. But both of them ended up living with Holmes up on Wrightwood in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. There's an address for the house, but it may not be exactly correct. There were also some maps drawn up. The renumbering guide isn't 100% reliable. But there's a better shot of Minnie Williams. There's actually a photograph of her, but frankly, she looks a little better in the drawings. This is her as an actress. Here's her when she was younger. And people just have weird stuff about her. She dealt in mystery. I'm not sure she liked men just to begin with. She was just kind of using Holmes. There's another possible picture of her. This is from the Boston Conservatory. It's a program of a performance that she performed in. This is a tableau. She's performing Envy here. I'm not 100% sure that that's her, but it looks about right to me. And she was definitely in the show that they're advertising in this program. But both Minnie and Nanny disappeared in July of 1893, and all of a sudden, Holmes became the owner of some property that she'd been holding in Fort Worth. About a month after they disappeared, there was a fire at the castle building. Strangely enough. He had taken out several fire insurance policies on the place, and to their credit, the insurance policies were not fooled one bit. So Holmes ended up spending the fall of 1893 just going from hotel to hotel himself, trying to stay a step ahead of the insurance companies who were coming to get him. Eventually, he decided, you know what, it's time that I get out of here. So he went to a girl he'd been dating, Georgiana Yoke, under the name Henry Mansfield Howard, and said, why don't we go to Fort Worth for a while? My uncle's got some land down there. We can build another place. We'll get married on the way. They went to Denver first because Holmes had to pick up some money that Minnie was owed over the death of her brother in a mining accident a couple of years before. But then he went down to Fort Worth with Georgiana, who knew that he was really known as Holmes and sometimes went by some other names, but generally knew it was H.M. Howard. He always said that he had an uncle named Henry Mansfield Howard, and he said that if I took his name, he would make me his heir. It's like they say on BoJack Horseman, when you're seeing somebody through rose-colored glasses, all the red flags just look like flags. We also don't have a photograph of her, just a bunch of sketches. But we know that she suffered from kind of like a goiter between her eyes that made it look like her eyes were bugging out. This might have been something she and Holmes bonded over. Holmes had strabismus. One of his eyes was what we would have called cross-eyed at the time. So they might have bonded over that. But she was eventually, there's actually been a whole novel about her called A Competent Witness by Judith Nichols. It's very well done. I really recommend that one. But Holmes was traveling with a guy by the name of Ben Peitzel, who he'd been involved in some crooked business dealings with for a couple of years. The two of them went down to Texas together with this grand plan that fall they were going to go to Philadelphia and fake Benjamin Peitzel's death for the insurance money. So they first went to Texas together, where they built this whole other building. It was really like a larger version of the castle. And the inside of that one was kind of a weird twisting and turning kind of thing as well. But the Texas authorities caught up with Holmes a lot faster than the Chicago ones had. He was getting involved in horse swindles. They do not like horse thieves in Texas. So he eventually made his way to St. Louis, where he got arrested again, did a little bit of time, met a couple of train robbers, spilled the whole beans about what he was planning to do regarding faking Benjamin Peitzel's death, which wasn't the smartest thing he ever did. But once he got out, they went to Philadelphia, where he rented a house on Callowhill Street, where Benjamin Peitzel set up as a patent buyer. But Holmes had possibly been planning to fake Peitzel's death from the start, but at some point along the line, he decided, I'm just going to kill the guy. So he killed him with chloroform poisoning. The body was buried in a shallow grave under an assumed name. Holmes then wrote to the insurance company and said, okay, this guy you buried under the name B.F. Perry, it's really Benjamin Peitzel. You owe his widow $10,000. Now, he and one of Peitzel's daughters, Alice, went to identify the body. Alice only had to see the teeth. But the insurance company put two and two together, eventually traced him to Boston, where they had him arrested on an outstanding warrant as a horse thief in Texas. But once he was arrested, he said, nope, not going to Texas as a horse thief. I know I'm also wanted for insurance fraud in Philadelphia. Let's just go to Philadelphia. He arrived at the police station in Boston and saw the president of the insurance company was there. He knew that's what they really wanted him for. So it was at this point that Holmes became a sensation, this guy who had faked his best friend's death to get $10,000. That was a massive con at the time. People were just fascinated. And this is when people remembered, didn't this guy have a building back in Chicago that was full of hidden rooms and secret passages and all of that shit? But then they just kind of ignored it until 1895 when he was convicted of insurance fraud. At that point, the district attorney sat him down and said, now, Holmes, you were traveling around with three of Peitzel's kids. For a while, you told us that he had faked his death and they were off with their father someplace. But now you admit it really was his body. You just made it look like an accident instead of a suicide. So where are the kids? And he said, oh, they're with my friend Minnie Williams. She's taken them out to London. Here's a secret code. And this is a large example of his handwriting right here. But he said, here, take this secret code down here, where the two words Republican, whereas capital R is A, capital E is B, etc. You can take out an ad in the New York Herald, and she might be able to see it in London where she is. So this is the kind of shit they had in the New York Herald. The first page was all these like coded messages and misconnections. It's great fun to read through these days. But he did in fact put in this ad here. So Minnie Williams, also a couple of other names that she used, according to him. Really, this says, contact George Graham in Philadelphia. Also contact Mr. Massey. We need to hear from you immediately. We got to know that you're alive and have the kids and aren't dead. Difficult to buy. But after that, they had this big investigation. Once they found they put a detective on the case who found the girls' bodies buried in Toronto in a cellar. And at that point, people remembered again. So this guy had this building full of hidden rooms. Let's investigate. And there's actually a picture of a crowd hanging around out here. Whole crowds would gather around. There's no photograph of the inside from Holmes' lifetime, but apparently there used to be. There's this drawing in the Chronicle of it. Now, problem is, we had a new chief of detectives of the job, chief of police. This was John J. Badenoch, a flour and feed dealer. As a flour and feed dealer, he had no connection whatsoever to anything that would be... ticket lead leads to nothing whatsoever that would lead to a job as a police officer, especially not chief of police, except for the fact that he hadn't been a cop. Everybody knew the cops were so corrupt that they had to have somebody from outside leading the charge. So 3 months before, he had been given the job because the mayor liked the cut of his jib. And they ended up just going around the place saying, oh, we found a rope. Maybe he was hanging people. And just letting their imaginations get carried away with them. There are a couple of diagrams. The Times Herald one is probably the best. But these guys were walking around. They'd find tanks of heating gas and think maybe this was poison gas. They'd find ashes in the stove and think maybe these are human ashes. There was also a thing about a footprint on the inside of one of the doors of the vaults, but it kind of depended on who you asked. Some people said it was real, some people said it wasn't, some people said they could see several footprints, some people couldn't see a footprint at all. And the press at first just loved this. The Chicago Mail had headlines like, fiendish, dastard. And I especially loved this one, red stains on a rope. Over the course of this headline, they debunked their own story. Red stains on a rope. Supposed bloody noose is found in H.H. Holmes's house. In a dust-covered chest. The theory is that victims were hanged by the neck. Might be a cochineal die at that. So by the end of July, articles were coming out like laughing at the police. Things were just about wrapping up when all of a sudden the police showed up with this guy saying, hey, guess what? We found it. We found what happened to the bodies. This guy, Mr. Chappell, used to buy them from Holmes to make into skeletons to sell to medical schools. Now, this has become a big part of Holmes lore, and usually I try to avoid actively criticizing Erik Larson. I realize that I have access to a lot more data than he did when he was writing Devil in the White City, but he had clearly read this article, Bones in a Trunk, about how Charles Chappell was buying dead bodies from Holmes, but he apparently didn't read the one the next day saying, never mind, the guy's name is Myron Chappell. Or the one after that, Bone Clue is weak. Chappell's grisly story looks like a romance. It turned out that this was just a guy who would say whatever the police wanted him to if they poured enough whiskey down his throat. He had long ago been a skeleton articulator, but way too early to have actually worked with H.H. Holmes on any of this stuff. It was really just kind of a last gasp of the cops. So in August of 1895, the whole story started to die out in Chicago. But then a couple of weeks in, the New York World published this article, The Castle of a Modern Bluebeard. And this is the one that speculated, well, this was a bustling hotel during the World's Fair. They were misinformed about that. It's like the list of people who came to Chicago and never returned from the fair was a long one, and in the greater number, foul play was suspected. Had they followed ads to Holmes' Castle and Hotel? Did he rob them and kill them? Now, this one paragraph, I'm not quoting it quite verbatim there, but it appeared in just about everything written after this. Everything written about Holmes used that exact one verbatim, up to and including Devil in the White City. Herbert Asbury, most notably. So, shortly after that one was republished in Chicago, under the idea like, wow, look how this case looks in New York, the place caught fire. Probably somebody had read the reprint of that article and thought, well, not in my backyard. But the house did not burn to the ground. The whole building was actually in as good a shape as it had ever been, really. It had never been in that good a shape. It was always kind of a dump. But they just had to rebuild the top couple of floors. This is at about the early turn of the 20th century. And here it is in 1938, shortly before it was torn down to make room for the Englewood Post Office. Now, most of the castle would have been to the space just to the left of this, the grassy knoll over here. And if you look right here, this is overlaying the Sanborn fire insurance maps with the two buildings. So you can see there was a little bit of overlap. To the extent that we can trust layering these maps. So layering the Sanborn fire insurance maps is not an exact science. But really, it would kind of occupy this space here. And I have gotten to go into the basement a couple of times. Here's me looking all cool down right about where the overlap is. So Holmes was eventually put on trial and sentenced to death just for the death of Benjamin Peitzel. Now, they didn't make that good of a case against him, honestly, but the jurors had all heard all these other stories about the guy. One of them even said, well, even if it wasn't that convincing, we'd heard the other stories. If he'd had better lawyers, he probably could have beaten the charge, but he did not have good lawyers. Of his two lawyers, one of them was a very talented young lawyer who would go on to do big things, but at this point he was really inexperienced and totally outclassed and totally outspent by the district attorney, his former law professor, and the other one was completely useless. So, after various appeals, and after all of that had been exhausted, he decided to just resign himself to being hanged. The New York Journal and the Philadelphia Inquirer teamed up to pay him to write a confession. The New York World had already tried to, and when he turned them down, they just published a big article on their own saying Holmes will be confessing to 20 murders. Once that came out, he couldn't very well confess to fewer than that, so he ended up confessing to 27 of them. Of these, quite a few people were still alive. Others had probably never existed at all, even the ones he was telling the truth about. He wasn't telling the truth about how he did it. There's only like one of them that I even suspect he got about right. Also, his confession was not nearly as startling as the prices over at Cunningham Piano Co. That's an important thing to know. The confession was debunked almost immediately. One thing that still comes up from it a lot is he claimed in the confession that he had killed Alice and Nellie Peitzel by luring them into a trunk and then hooking up to a gas hose that went up to the wall. But the house they had been in at the time did not actually have gas connections. So that wouldn't have been quite right. So he was hanged in 1895. Here he is getting buried in a giant block of cement. Now, on the scaffold, he took back the confession, said, I've only killed the two people. It was just Emmeline and Julia. And he said that they both died at his hands as the result of illegal abortions, which might not have even been intentional on his part. It was a dangerous operation, and Holmes was by no account an actually competent doctor. But by his own request, he was buried in a massive block of cement. It was kind of a trend at the time. Prominent people were afraid that their bodies were going to get dug up and held for ransom. Holmes had people who wanted to put his bones in sideshows. So he arranged to be buried in a block of cement. He thought that would keep people from digging him up, but he didn't reckon with the awesome power of the History Channel. So in 1898, one of the guys Holmes claimed, two of the guys, in fact, that Holmes had claimed to murder were out with stories that Holmes had not really been hanged at all. Now, in their version of the story, it was probably one of them repeating the other. In their version of the story, Holmes had escaped. There was some other guy with a mustache they hanged. In fact, the guy they hanged was already dead. They were just propping him up just like Weekend at Bernie's. Mustache and everything. And this was transparently nonsense. It was debunked almost immediately. The way that they had told about the hanging did not correspond at all with what actually happened. In fact, the place that they said Holmes was now residing in San Paramaribo, South America, was not even a real place. So it was debunked almost immediately, but somehow the American Ripper Show used some of this information and some of this story, some of which I'll confess I was the one who gave it to him, to have the body disinterred in Philadelphia a few years back. So here's how he looked, and if you look closely there, you can see the jaw is down below the skull. It's almost like he's screaming. But here he is all cleaned up for a night on the town. And the DNA test did confirm that this was in fact H.H. Holmes, just like I told him it would be. But here's a cool thing, is there was a doctor named Eugene Talbot who published a physical examination of him in the Journal of the American Medical Association, including things like this jaw cast. And you could actually match this up to the jaw that they dug up. You can see that all the right teeth are bent, all the right teeth are missing. Personally, I thought that was all kinds of cool to be able to match that up. For the most part, Talbot's report is all about the bumps and ridges on his skull, this being the 1890s and all. But there is this one stray line that I got to close on. Sexual organs, unusually small. And good night, folks. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and plug some of the upcoming events. Also plug the book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil. Among our upcoming things, on October 20th, a week from today, back on the Mysterious Chicago page, we're going to be doing Johann Hawk, a serial killer from about 10 years later, who I was filling in gaps in my collection over in the microfilm room today. Then October 27th, it is an all-new virtual time travel pub crawl Halloween special. Details are up on Eventbrite. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen. Also, we've got Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m. There's still tickets left at Graceland Cemetery. On October 23rd, we'll be doing 2 tours at Graceland Cemetery. Then October 29th, we're at Rose Hill and Graceland. And it goes on. We've got a lot more walking tours at the cemeteries coming up over the course of the next month. Not to mention, I think there's still like 9 p.m. tickets for the Lincoln Park Zoo tours on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, the haunted history tours that I'm running. Also, quickly plug my Cemetery Coyotes 2023 calendar. You can find information for all of that stuff over on adamchicago.com. And with that, everybody, sorry again for the starting late over here, but we're going to put on the Benny Goodman and hang out like we always do. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours, and here's Benny Goodman, coming to you live from the Joseph Urban Room at the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. Hey to anybody new joining us out there, glad to have you around. Megan, glad to hear that. Yes, and on Time Travel Pub Crawl, we will announce the pumpkin winners as well. I was not ready for that shot. All right. Lynn, I was about 10-15 minutes late. There was some kind of problem with the server. Like we don't do this every week. I had just gotten off the phone with John Records Landecker on WGN, who actually played one of my old songs. I thought she was a goth when it turned out she was dead. Where he even found that, or found out about it, I don't really know. But luckily we're on Effing Chicago tonight, so I could do some swearing. On Effing Chicago, we swear. Welcome anybody new. We're glad to have you. Most of the time I'm over on the Mysterious Chicago Facebook page. Jamie, I already played the spooky audio this morning. It's over on TikTok right now, too. The Adam Chicago on TikTok. Thank you, Eleanor. Tracy, awesome. See you Sunday. For I am yours sincerely, with all my heart. Thank you, Leonita. Laura, Miles has shown up briefly here today. Where is the boy? Miles! Oh, he's over on the couch over here. You guys want to... I'll just... Instead of moving him, we'll just bring him over here. There's the guy, making his contractual appearance. I might be able to bring him for the Graceland tour on the 29th. I haven't had a chance to check it out. Until we try it with the new construction situation, I'm not going to be able to tell. So a week before we'll know. Jordana, that's awesome. My busy season is still in full swing. Last 2 nights I had the zoo tours. Today I had a day in the microfilm room, plus a radio interview, and then this. Tomorrow I got a private tour, plus Whiskey and a Cookie on the Patty Vasquez Facebook page. Then Saturday's a tour, Sunday's 2 tours. But that's this time of year. That's what I do this time of year. I go into it expecting to work a lot, and I love working a lot. Microfilm room was a blast today. I got to see exactly what they published, what Wilbur F. Story published that made Lydia Thompson horsewhip him. It's like, I would have just done it on general principles myself. Happy Sukkos, Lynn. Susan, no, I didn't. I got my hair wet today, that's about it. I was actually having a terrible hair day until I took off my hat right before. I was like, yeah, that's not so bad. Oh, and once again, if you were at Mystericon a couple of weekends ago, and you're coming on another tour later, I will have for you, while supplies last, a Mystericon patch, compliments of Octavio. These things are really cool. This like stitched up version of the Fizz illustration, plus the Miles logo. This was so cool. Giovanna, no, you don't have to be a member to access the archives. You just have to sign up for an appointment. And today was a long one for me. They were open from noon to 3:30, and I was there the whole time, going through the Evening American, the Record Herald, and the Times. Yeah, I also wrestled an AC unit and moved my window seat over to its winter location. It moves over a couple of feet. It's a better view out that particular window. Really, the best way to get one right now is come on one of the tours the next couple of weeks and tell me you require one. And I'll try to keep them while supplies last. A couple of you guys have emailed me to try to hold on to one for you, and I'm trying to honor all of that. Paula, my job is the best. I love my job. I dig up stories about dead people and tell stories about dead people. Contextualize stories about dead people. Resurrect stories about dead people. I drive around in an orange car solving mysteries. I am trying to find the way to distribute the patches that allows me to do the least mailing. Zoo tours absolutely count. And Katie, with the rain and everything, you guys picked an odd day to come. I'm sorry about that. I feel like we all had a good time in the rain. I hope John's feet eventually dried off, Katie. And if you particularly want to reserve one and you think it might be on a tour eventually, just email me now. I'll try to put one aside for you. Just remind me when you're coming. Karen, I don't know how I do it either. Honestly, I don't know how I remember all this stuff. Yes, Keanu Reeves has dropped out of Devil in the White City. That's all the information I got for you. Possibly he read this book about H.H. Holmes and realized the whole thing was nonsense, so... That's probably not what happened. It might be what happened. It might. Honestly, if it ever comes out that anybody attached to the project decided not to do it because they read my book, I'll be highly amused. I went to the museum store at the History Museum. They had my Holmes book right next to Devil in the White City. They had not heard that it wasn't that accurate. No, Kristen. I wouldn't know how to call Keanu to threaten him. And if I did, I'd be complaining that I figured out the ending of the last Bill and Ted movie within about 2 minutes of the movie starting. And also, I can't find a recording of the song they're singing in the bar that goes, "We are those who rock. We are those who rock." That's brilliant. Who would play Hawk in a movie like Dennis Franz in 1992? I had a really good time on the WGN radio thing tonight. I was just goofing off. I got to rip on Wilbur F. Story and Buckner Stith Morris. My album, Kathleen, is out mid-November. Maybe during the Time Travel Pub Crawl, I'll put up the lyric video for the Rejected Bond theme, "A Shitty Way to Die," that is on the album. A shitty way to die. A shitty way to die.
And that would put rhythm in the feet of a wooden Indian. That was the bugle call rag, Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now, the popular tune, "Thanks a Million."
Peter Lorre, yeah, Peter Lorre could be Hawk. I could see that. You ever see a Monsieur Verdot with Chaplin? He's playing a character very similar to Hawk. Honestly, Lorre would be a very good H.H. Holmes, too. He was said to have talked in a very high, reedy voice, and there's even one description that said he had a habit of winding his fingers when he was talking. So Holmes literally talked like this. Are you loose? Because I'm loose. I had to cough all through the first segment on WGN, and after that I figured I better start on the bourbon. I've earned it today. It's been a long one. Been a long couple of days. But tomorrow we will be right back at it. Tomorrow morning we are back with some more Find a Grave Friday. I had such a good time doing the one last week. I've had some good photos of Hawk today. Now, I gotta find somebody's got a microfilm reel from the trial, because I don't have a microfilm reel from the trial. But here's the big score that I found last week is H.H. Holmes had several different lawyers. Wharton Plummer we talked about a bit tonight, who was absolutely as crooked as Holmes was. There was a guy named D.T. Duncombe who was slightly less crooked than that. A guy named Fitzalan Woodbury who was a little less crooked still, and probably the most straight arrow of them all was a guy named Edward Maher who had really good handwriting. I love it when I find a Maher case because there's always great handwriting. So in 1906, H.H. Holmes was about to be hanged. A lawyer who believed that he was innocent came running into Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis's office and tried to save him at the last minute. And that lawyer was Edward Maher. The same guy who had once represented Holmes all of a sudden had it in his head that Johann Hawk was an innocent man that he had to save from the gallows. And I'm still trying to figure out what made him think that. That's part of why I have to get every article from every local paper that might have asked him. Heather, I'll try to be worthy of my post there. Everybody's trucking. Well, all right, everybody. I am absolutely exhausted. So I'm going to be taking off for the night. I will see you all back in the morning for Find a Grave Friday. Quick plug once again for the upcoming stuff. There's still tickets for the 2 p.m. on Sunday at Graceland. I think there might be 1 or 2 left for Rose Hill as well on Saturday. Then we've got more coming up on the 23rd, the 29th, the 30th. All kinds of stuff. A week from today, we will be doing Johann Hawk virtually. You know, I love talking about Johann Hawk. And I'm going to be sorting stuff about him all week, so I'll be in just the right mindset. Then October 27th, an all-new Halloween special edition of Time Travel Pub Crawls. So everybody, thank you very much for joining me today over here on Effing Chicago. We'll be back on Mysterious Chicago next Thursday night, like always. And until then, until morning, stay safe and stay strong. And if you can, ladies and gentlemen,